What is up, guys? Welcome to Nerd with Guns. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of my favorite video games of all time, Fallout New Vegas. Now, quick side note before we get started. New Vegas, and the Fallout franchise in general, takes place in an alternate history where the Cold War never ended, so everything's got a nice 1950s aesthetic. And I very much blame this game for instigating my love of retro AR-15s. Sit back and enjoy while I nitpick the hell out of this game.
You got what you were after, so pay up.
You're crying in the rain, Pally.
Guess who's waking up over here?
Time to cash out.
Will you get it over with?
Maybe cons kill people without looking them in the face. But I ain't a fink. Dig? You've made your last delivery, kid. Sorry you got twisted up in this scene. From where you're kneeling must seem like an 18-carat run of bad luck. Truth is, the game was rigged from the start.
The first gun we're going to be looking at today is the Browning High Power, known simply as the 9mm pistol in the game. It's the first weapon we're given at the start of the game, and there is a unique variant called Maria, which we saw in the intro as the weapon that Benny shoots us in the head with. For the most part, the weapon appears to be a decent representation of the real thing, except if you look closely when you reload, the safety catch actually pivots upward instead of the slide catch. While we're on the topic, one thing you're going to notice being common to all the guns in Fallout New Vegas is that all reloads are animated as though the weapon is completely empty, whether or not it actually is. So the player will always rack around when you reload. Next up, we're going to take a look at the AR-15 series as they're presented in the game. Bizarrely, they're all side chargers, which do exist on the AR-15 platform in real life, but usually they lack the forward assist and brass deflector, because when the weapon fires, the charging handle, which in this case is attached directly to the bolt carrier, needs to go somewhere, and the weapons aren't shown to have a track behind the ejection port for the charging handle to travel backwards through. Realistically, the bolt carrier should not be able to move far enough back to pick up a new round off the magazine. The guns all also seem to lack the bolt catch because we always use the charging handle to chamber a new round on reloads, making me believe they may have lifted this reload animation from the AK-based Chinese assault rifle in Fallout 3. The first specific rifle we're going to take a look at today is the service rifle, which appears to be based on the M16A1, though with wooden handguards. One thing to note, though, is the A1 did not have a brass deflector, but there were ARs made through the 70s and 80s that still made use of the A1 style sight, but added a brass deflector and the A2 furniture, most notable being the Canadian C7. I'm pretty sure the service rifle was made after the Great War by the gun runners for the NCR, so that would explain some things, including why it does the least damage out of the ARs in this game despite having the longest barrel, and presumably the greatest muzzle velocity. The Survivalist rifle is treated as a unique variant of the service rifle, but this one is most definitely pre-war. We actually get some backstory on this one, as it was the service weapon of one Randall Clark, who was a checkpoint guard before the war, who was a central figure in the Honest Hearts DLC over 150 years after his death. The Survivalist rifle seems to be based on the Model 605, which was an M16 with the barrel cut down just in front of the front sight tower, but it's also chambered in 12.7mm, which seems to be this game's version of the 50 Beowulf. The Survivalist rifle is absolutely beat to hell, with the rear sight being entirely missing, the front sight bent, and the handguard held on with hose clamps. It's also somehow capable of holding 10 rounds of 50 Beowulf and a magazine based on a 20-round 5.56 mag, which would realistically only hold 7 50 Beowulf. The assault carbine seems to be based on the Colt Model 733, but the barrel and handguard almost look too long for me, almost like it's supposed to be a mid-length instead of a carbine. The assault carbine is chambered in the game's fictitious 5mm cartridge, and it can feed 24 of them from a 20-round 5.56 magazine. Something to note about the assault carbine is that it actually seems to be blowback operated, because the Gunrunner's Arsenal specific version has a modification called the Light Bolt, which actually appears to depict a pistol caliber AR-15 bolt. You can see it's all one piece, lacks the locking lugs, and lacks a gas key. Because of this and the 5mm's inherent armor penetrating capability, the 5.7x28 immediately comes to mind, but unfortunately nobody in real life actually makes a barrel designed to readily accept a front sight base. I should note before we move on that in the mid-80s, Colt actually did make a 9mm SMG looks quite a bit like this gun, as a means to introduce the M16 to the law enforcement market, but unfortunately it didn't really make as big of a splash as other weapons of the era, like the Uzi and MP5. The Colt 9mm SMG actually fed from modified Uzi magazines and used a slick side-up receiver, meaning it didn't have the forward assist or brass deflector, but it did have a hockey puck-looking gas deflector attached over the back half of the ejection port. Here we have the Marksman Carbine, which appears to be based on the Colt Model 933, which is basically an 11-inch M4 but with a Magpul PRS stock, an ACOG style scope, and an Arms Incorporated rail. I've also seen this gun compared to the Faxon Firearms ARAC, but the game came out several years before the gun did. The PRS is kind of a weird choice on a carbine this short because it's meant more for dedicated sniper rifles like the M110. With that in mind, over the last couple of years, B5 Systems actually started making a stock similar in design to the PRS, but it uses a carbine-style buffer tube, and thus collapses like any other carbine stock. Obviously, this was not a thing when New Vegas came out, but it wouldn't be completely impractical to build a rifle like this today. There is a unique version of the Marksman Carbine called the All-American, which features a woodland camo paint job despite the fact it's located in Nevada, and that's actually the version that we're using in our gameplay footage. Moving on from ARs, now we're going to take a look at the light machine gun, which appears to be based primarily on the M249 SAW, making it the weapon of choice for the nuclear winter soldier, with a handguard and front sight that seems to be taken from the M60. The handguard is also wood like that of the service rifle, implying it may have been made post-war for the NCR as well. One thing that bugs me about this one is that it's based on two belt-fed machine guns, but it appears that the belt box functions more like a magazine, with no animation for actually loading a belt into the feed tray. Here we have the Silence 22 SMG, which is based on the American 180 submachine gun. This one's a fun one, and one that I wish I could actually own. As you can see, it feeds from these top-mounted drum magazines. Like the real deal, is only capable of firing on full auto. The design philosophy for this is, for SWAT teams, you could put an ungodly amount of 22 long rifle downrange in urban environments, which would be capable of overwhelming threats but minimize collateral damage. The American 180 was ultimately done in by the Hughes Amendment, which prohibits civilians from owning machine guns made after 1986. And the company tried to cheat the system by registering serial numbers for guns that hadn't yet been made before the cutoff date. The ATF ultimately figured out what was going on, and unfortunately American Arms is no more. The American 180 scene in-game is integrally suppressed, as the name implies, and lacks a stock. The magazine capacity is slightly incorrect, as despite the railgun's name, a standard drum only held 177 rounds. There is an extended drum modification that bumps the capacity up to 240, but that isn't quite right either, because bigger drums for the real deal would hold either 220 or 275 rounds. Likewise, the rate of fire for this gun is quite a bit off. The real gun is like a swarm of angry hornets. Forgotten Weapons has a video on it, and it is just absolutely insane. The one in the game is so much slower than the one in real life. The automatic rifle, based on the Browning automatic rifle, or the BAR, was added to the game via the Dead Money DLC, seemingly intended to be used by casino security forces, which honestly is a job that the American 180 would have been better suited for. The gun has a pistol grip, not unlike the Colt Monitor, which was the civilian version of the gun back in the day, and is chambered in .308 rather than .30-06, though this was likely done for the sake of not having to introduce a whole new caliber to the game. The gun has a bipod, though it can't be deployed, even though the Pip-Boy icon shows it with the bipod folded down, and it appears to be missing the front sight posts. If you've looked at the 10mm SMG and thought you might have seen some MP5 influence, you'd be correct. The 10mm SMG seems to be based on the 1980s HK SMG prototypes that would have been the successor to the MP5. Some small texture changes aside, the biggest differences between the gun in the game and the real HK SMG are the lack of a foregrip, a sling loop being added at the rear instead of a stock, and the fact that it fires 10mm instead of 9mm like the original SMG was supposed to. The second SMG prototype also had a selector lever up front, similar to the adjustable gas blocks on modern gas-operated weapons, that would alter how the gun behaved when firing supersonic and subsonic rounds, something that I believe is referenced by the Integrally Suppressed unique variant of the game called Sleepy Time. Last, but certainly not least, is the China Lake, Fallout New Vegas' grenade launcher. The China Lake, named after the facility that designed it, is an iconic pump-action grenade launcher that shows up in tons of media relating to the Cold War, despite the fact they were very limited in number, with somewhere between 16 and 50 actually ever having been made. The program ended because, despite being considered extremely effective in Vietnam, they simply were not very reliable. A China Lake launcher that has been heavily modified into an energy weapon is actually the first gun that the Courier gets in the Dead Money add-on called the Hollow Rifle. Thank you guys so much for watching. You might have heard some funny noises towards the end there, and that's because my daughter and my dogs were playing right next to where I was trying to record the voiceover for the China Lake. In any event, guys, have a nice rest of your day. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe.